So in terms of population displacement, it's a bit kind of like climate change for the panel anyway. Accepting that it's going to happen isn't the question anymore. It's dealing with how it actually is going to work and how do we make it work. And one of the big ones is the settlements and community integration. And it really reiterates how big climate change is and how social justice includes education and health and community groups and absolutely everything. And that's where we really should start working on the level of the people who are in this room right now. Climate change is going to affect every aspect of work and home life. Maybe not so much in flooding rooms, but in an increased number of people from other countries, in the need for health research to be going into different types of health matters that we've never quite considered before. In terms of settlement, in trying to explain to people how we actually live. We heard another really interesting story about a group from, I can't remember, it was a South Pacific island, and I don't remember which one it was, but they came in and they were set up in housing, and they were taken through their new houses and said, this is a microwave, and a microwave is when you want to heat things up really quickly. This is your electric kettle, and you boil hot water in here. And there was a huge fire about 3 days later because they wanted to boil water very quickly, so they put water in the kettle and put the kettle in the microwave. And that makes complete sense if you'd explained to it that way and you've never actually even imagined that these two appliances would ever exist. So all of these types of strategies to help settle people are going to be really important at the community level for people to really start bringing into the part of our everyday thinking about how we live here. And then the more government-initiated ones are things like flexible visa options and extending our questions of what actually constitutes a refugee. I had no idea about refugee law before this process, and there's a lot of worry in the refugee advocacy community about the idea that we might re-look at what actually refugee international law says. The danger is if we start to open up the actual convention, countries all around the world could potentially start pulling out of what they've signed on for, because refugee law came out of World War II from the Holocaust, and a lot of countries signed on to help out, and now they're just in that law, and Australia is one of them. The idea of opening it up, Australia could pull out, the US could pull out, and all of a sudden you would have people that really need access to refugee support would have lost all of that. So the argument is that we need a new idea about forced migrant international protections and visas and help for global citizens due to climate change. One of the options that we talked about a lot in our group was the idea of student visas and exchange programs where we actually change entire councils or sections of a council. So you get people from Bangladesh coming here and get people from northern New South Wales going to Bangladesh so that we can change adaptation, professional development and strategies. You can probably flick again. The issue of governance, this was probably our most controversial recommendations that we made. And these aren't the actual recommendations, because you've got to kind of have the paper in order to understand the recommendations for this particular topic. But the panel was really adamant about the fact that this couldn't be the political football that I mentioned before, and we wanted to argue for a nonpartisan, similar to a Warr cabinet, climate change commission. And we did recommend one, and the special envoy from the Australian government, Howard Bamsley, who came to accept our recommendations, was madly writing and looking a little concerned while he was writing this recommendation. But we'll see what happens with this one. In terms of the biggest worry that we had, and Honourable Duncan Kerr actually came and listened to our presentations, and he was one of the expert speakers on South Pacific Island forums and in this section, in the governance section. And he had some interesting answers for us in terms of how this could never not be a political football. And again, that's another thing coming back down to the community, that it's really only us that can choose to not make it such and make it a solid issue that we just are expressive about, but not necessarily swayed by whatever party is telling whatever it is that they think is the answer of the month. Just trying to read, I have too many words on there. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. You can read about the Climate Change Commission on the one you can flick through. So really, the major take-home messages that I brought back from the panel, and that I really hope to be able to express about the panel in the next coming months as we do various things back in our different communities, is that as citizens, we must absolutely be willing to actively support the choices that we're asking the government to make. So it's great to have these discussions and for us to write these recommendations. But we did some really interesting activities around even the carbon trading scheme and saying who's willing to pay for this, and everyone ran over to the willing side. And then who has the capacity to pay to this? And little by little people started trickling back out to the other side. So if we do really want to support this, we've got to consider all of the things that we actually are going to take up in that support. The complexity of climate change, again, it's just one of those things that we're going to get wrong time and time and time again, and there's going to be a lot of lessons to be learned. And just accepting from the outset that this is a huge learning curve, and adaptation is essentially evolution and learning and processes of people and communities constantly moving forward and learning sometimes really hard lessons. It won't be as hard if we pick that up straight from the beginning and just accept it and go with it. And in terms of the actual citizens panel itself, I wish more than anything that what we could actually do is create our own citizens panels every single time one ends. So if I could do one in Tasmania and everyone else could do one in the 14 different communities that we lived in, we could actually exponentially grow what is a huge understanding on climate change and understanding how much more we need to know, and little by little start to fill in all those holes of knowledge that every individual brings back to the table when they come to it. So I would love to hear from anyone who would be interested in participating in one, and it'd be a great thing, I think, for community organizations to put together. And I think that's the last slide. There might be one more if anybody wanted to have a look at the full recommendations. That's where they sit. You can also just Google Green Cross and you can maneuver your way around their website. They've got a lot of great resources on there as well. So that's it. Thank you.